In the late 19th century, after the close of the Civil War, Americans unfairly decided that segregation is acceptable in the Plessy v. Ferguson court case, leading to the Jim Crow laws and the separate but equal philosophy. In the mid-20th century, these ideologies were challenged by a man by the name of Oliver Brown. Oliver saw the injustice and difference between African American and white facilities. African Americans had a greater percentage of poverty and with a lower standard of education were less likely to get out of poverty. He wanted to enroll his daughter, Linda Brown, into an all-white elementary school in Topeka, Kansas. The school was closer to her house, yet she was not allowed to use the education that Oliver pays taxes for and is more advantageous for her. Oliver, backed by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, hired Thurgood Marshall to take on the Board of Education. Thurgood, a lawyer who had almost 30 Supreme Court victories before his appointment, dealing with severe racial strains, began to gather evidence from witnesses of other African American families, who were also denied education due to race. Even Thurgood himself was denied admittance into the University of Maryland. In doing so, Thurgood found that 5 states, Delaware, South Carolina, Virginia, Washington, D.C., and Kansas, had rejected African American involvement in white school facilities. In 1954, the case became larger than a state jurisdiction and was tried in the Supreme Court and named Brown v. Board of Education. Marshall challenged racial segregation in Plessy v. Ferguson, yet the case was painfully slow, an objective by the board to quiet the movement in support to finalize the case. He was receiving many death threats and feared invasions of his house, but still found the courage to challenge the Supreme Court in one of the most influential cases of the 19th century. Eventually, the jury unanimously declared the denial of white facilities was a violation of the 14th Amendment, which declares that all citizens have equal protection, and the state has no right to enforce the rights or privileges of U.S. citizens, thus making segregation of race in education illegal, and allows equal access to funding for textbooks, curriculum materials, high-quality programs, and updated facilities. African Americans slowly began to integrate into white schools and would gain a greater education and future. But the issue went further than the educational facilities. The rule rejected the many old philosophies and claimed separate is not equal. Facilities would become one, and minorities could enjoy the same public restrooms, water fountain, restaurants, and busing seating. Thurgood would go on to become a respected lawyer and later become the first African American Supreme Court justice. Linda Brown was unable to go to Sumner Elementary School because the case took too long, but she would become an activist and campaigner for equality in education. The NAACP gained attention and power and used it for other boycotts and demonstrations to promote inclusion. Though this was a major win for equal rights minorities, there is still more that will need to change, and though the laws have changed, it's the people's hearts and treatment toward the minorities that will need to become more accepting of anyone of any race, gender, religion, or sexual orientation. Despite this court case, segregation is unfortunately still evident even today, whether it's intentional or not. After the court case, there was an immigration of African Americans toward cities to be protected by the government and seek more job opportunities closer to their families. While the city began to become more diverse, whites began to move toward suburban neighborhoods that many African Americans couldn't afford. While the court verdict prevents segregation in education, it does not hide the fact that many urban school districts are predominantly black. Therefore, schools today are still struggling to provide equal opportunities in segregation, although not necessarily intentional. It's still something we're struggling with today. The Oliver Brown court case was a substantial step towards equality and the end of segregation, but it was not the final step. People are going to have to continue working towards integration and equal opportunity for everyone, no matter race, gender, or preferences. And if progress continues like it did with this court case and other significant moments in the civil rights movement, one day there will hopefully be absolute equal opportunity for everyone. As Martin Luther King Jr. once put it, we may have all come on different ships, but we're in the same boat now.